Greetings to my fellow students in the Introduction to Music Production class. Today's topic is going to be propagation. But before we move on, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Craig, and I am a native Texan. I'm currently living in Cincinnati, in the great city of Cincinnati, Ohio. But I remember when I was a boy, and there'd be thunderstorms in Texas, and I remember my parents telling me that I could determine whether or not the storm was approaching or whether it was leaving, moving away, by watching for lightning and then counting the number of seconds that it took for the sound to reach me. And that I would keep doing that with different strikes of lightning, and if the time between the strikes of lightning and the sound got longer, then the storm would be going away. But if the amount of time between lightning strikes and when I could hear it got shorter, the storm was approaching. But I think what was even more interesting to me was when they taught me how to estimate how far the storm was from arriving at our home. And what they did was they told me to look for the lightning and then count the number of seconds that it took to hear the thunder. And then they told me to take that number of seconds and divide it by 5. And then the number from that calculation would be an estimate in miles for how far away the storm was. So in other words, if I counted 10 seconds, then the storm was about 2 miles away. And if I counted 15 seconds, then the storm was about 3 miles away. In other words, sound travels or propagates about 1 mile in 5 seconds in air. So what does this term propagate mean? So I looked up propagate in dictionary.com, and the most relevant definition that I saw for this topic was to move through, cause to move through, or transmit, especially in the form of a wave. In other words, to propagate sound would be an example. So this idea is that sound travels through some medium, whether it's air or water or wood or glass, what have you. So I pulled out a physics book from college and looked up the speed of sound in a number of different mediums just to kind of get an idea of how the speed of sound changes in different mediums. And the first thing I saw was air, dry air at 0 degrees C, and I saw that it traveled about 331 meters per second, or 1,087 feet per second. The next item in the table was dry air at 20 degrees C, so it's 20 degrees warmer, and you can see that the speed increases from 331 to 343 meters per second, or 1,130 feet per second. In steam at 134 degrees C, we see a pretty big jump in the speed of sound. It goes to 494 meters per second, or 1,620 feet per second. You can look at it in hydrogen, water. Interestingly, seawater is like 5 times the speed, almost 5 times the speed of air. In that it'll travel 1,519 meters per second, or 4,984 feet per second in seawater, which I thought was kind of interesting. But if we go back to air, which is where we're mostly going to be working in this class, the speed of sound in air can be written in equation form, kind of an idealized equation, but where you have the speed of sound is equal to the square root of the specific heat ratio times pressure divided by density. So in other words, anything that has an impact on specific heat ratio, pressure, or density is going to affect the speed of sound. And so many things like temperature and elevation, humidity, etc., are going to have an impact on the speed of sound. So one of the reasons why the speed of sound is important to us in this class are things like delay effects, and starting to really understand the relationship between the source location and the timing of the sound when the sound leaves the source and when it arrives at the listener. and how we can use that to create different kinds of effects. Or as you see in this picture, I'm sure many of you have been to a concert or some type of event where you have a large jumbotron screen where you see people singing or talking, and then the sound propagates from the speakers to your ears, and you really want to sync those two up. When you hear the sound, you really want to be seeing the on the screen the mouths moving. And so in this case, you might be applying a delay effect to the video source. But either way, the idea is that the source location of the sound is related to the timing of the sound as it reaches the listener, or sound propagation. So I wanted to write down a list of things to remember from sound propagation. The first thing is to know that the definition of propagation is the sound's movement through a medium. I also wanted to mention that the speed of sound is the measure of how fast sound moves through air. And we looked at the equation of that, and we found that the speed of sound is a function of things like elevation and temperature and the medium that is moving through. So anything that has an impact on the specific heat ratio or pressure or density will have an impact on the speed of sound. But when we're just talking about, kind of a standard day, standard air, there's some rough orders of magnitude on the speed of sound, and these would be 1 kilometer in 3 seconds, or 340 meters in 1 second, or 1 mile in 5 seconds, or 1 foot per millisecond. So that gives you kind of an idea how quick the speed of sound is in air. Also want you to remember that the sound's location has a big impact when the listener hears it, or the timing of when the listener hears it. So delay effects and sound propagation are strongly related, and these are things that you need to understand as a music production individual.